Every modern city loves to call itself historic, but some of them mean it in a much more literal way. In a few places, the ancient world is not across town in a museum, it's under the local bakery, beside the subway tunnel, or buried right below a brand new housing project. From apartments to graveyards to pyramids and even royal palaces, some of the world's most beautiful cities actually sit on the foundations of civilizations that were old before most countries even existed. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 modern cities that are actually built on ancient ruins. 25. Lima, Peru. Lima is Peru's capital, and the place where most of the country's business and daily life come together. Almost a third of Peru's population lives in or around the city, and it has everything you'd expect from a modern hub. The biggest airport in the country is here, along with major sports venues and a light rail system that helps move people across the city. Even with all of that, Lima sits on ground that was important long before any of the modern buildings showed up. The Incas had settlements in the area around 1400 CE, but most of those sites disappeared under centuries of new construction. That started to change in the 50s, when archaeologists began uncovering pieces of the city's older layers. One of the best examples is Huacahualamarca, a pre-Columbian abode pyramid standing right in the middle of a busy district. It looks completely different from the streets around it, and gives people a chance to see what life was like here long before Lima grew into the city it is today. 24. Trowulan, Indonesia. The ground under the houses and farms of Trowulan tells an incredible story. The area is widely believed to be the capital of what used to be the Majapahit Empire, a kingdom that ruled huge parts of Southeast Asia from the late 1200s to the early 1500s. Archaeologists have uncovered canals, metalworking areas, temples, and pieces of a large palace complex spread across the landscape. A few of the workshop areas look like they were turning out goods on a large scale, and that matches written accounts of Majapahit's strength and wealth. One thing that gives the site away is the brickwork. Majapahit builders used red bricks instead of the volcanic stone common in other Javanese kingdoms, so a single wall is usually enough to confirm what era you're looking at. 23. Cairo, Egypt. The oldest part of the city, Fustat, was founded in the 600s, and every generation since has built over whatever came before. That means houses, shops, and apartment blocks stand on layers of Islamic, Coptic, Roman, and Pharaonic material. It's happened more than once that when people dig foundations in some districts, they hit old walls, pottery, cisterns, or burial shafts. A few families in Old Cairo have uncovered parts of Roman houses under their floor tiles. Construction crews run into this problem all the time. One road project in Fustat actually had to be rerouted after workers hit the remains of an entire early Islamic quarter. When this happens, the government usually steps in quickly. Work stops, the site's inspected, and archaeologists decide what can be preserved before construction goes on. 22. Cholula, Mexico. If you walk through Cholula today, you might not notice that the town is sitting on a giant. The grassy hill in the center is the Great Pyramid of Cholula. The structure started around 200 BCE and expanded repeatedly by groups like the Olmecs and Toltecs. Its base covers about 400 by 400 meters, which makes it the largest pyramid in the world by volume. At its height, more than 100,000 people lived nearby, and the entire area was a major cultural center. When the Spanish arrived in 1520, the pyramid was already buried under layers of earth, so they treated it like a natural hill and built a church on top. That church is still there, and the town grew around it without realizing what lay underneath. 21. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Tres Hombres looks like a regular neighborhood on the edge of Buenos Aires, but the ground beneath it holds one of Argentina's most important archaeological sites. The Querandi people used to live along the Matanza River and left terraces, tools, pottery, and burial areas behind that can still be found under the modern landscape. The Ecesa Tres site marks the heart of that settlement, and whenever someone digs deep enough, pieces of that past show up. Locals have found ceramic fragments and bone in their backyards, and archaeologists have mapped sections where old structures sit just below the surface. Sadly, even with legal protections, much of the land has been overtaken by unregulated construction, and about 80% of the site is now covered by new housing, which puts pressure on both the cultural remains and the indigenous community that sees this ground as sacred. They continue to push for a museum and community center to protect what's left before the last untouched area disappears. 20. Barcelona, Spain. Walk around Barcelona, or Barcelona, today, and it's easy to get distracted by the food, the neighborhoods, and the architecture. But the place has been lived in since Roman times. The first major settlement was Barcino, a military colony that grew into a small Roman town, and a big part of it is preserved down there. Under the City History Museum, visitors move through old streets, storage rooms, and work areas where people made wine and salted fish. The floors, walls, and tools look surprisingly well kept for their age. One of the easiest Roman landmarks to spot is the Temple of Augustus. It once stood at the center of the old city, and a handful of its giant columns have survived. 19. Rome, Italy. Rome feels busy and modern on the surface, but the city is basically sitting on its own past. Over nearly 3,000 years ago, people kept building new layers on top of old ones, until only a fraction of ancient Rome remained exposed. The rest lies under today's sidewalks and neighborhoods. That's why construction projects here sometimes slow down for archaeology teams instead of engineers. When you visit, you can see how the old and new fit together. The Colosseum still stands at the edge of a traffic circle. The Forum rests below street level like a sunken timeline, while the Pantheon looks almost untouched, even though its dome is nearly 2,000 years old. Castel Sant'Angelo stretches the city's history even further. It began as the Emperor Hadrian's tomb and ended up as a fortress, prison, and museum. 18. Istanbul, Turkey. Istanbul stands out because so many different eras left their mark on the same place. The city began in the Roman world, grew into the center of the Byzantine Empire, and later became a major seat of Ottoman power. You can see pieces of each period without looking very hard. The Basilica Cistern is one of the most amazing windows into its earlier days. Justinian had it built in the 500s, and the space feels almost unreal, with rows of tall stone columns rising out of the water below. More reminders from the past sit above ground. You also find reminders of the old city in places like the Column of Constantine, the Valens Aqueduct, and the remains of the Hippodrome, where crowds once gathered for races and ceremonies. 17. Paris, France. It's hard to picture Paris as a Roman town, but that's exactly how it started. The city's earliest version, Lutetia, took shape in the 1st century BCE when the Romans settled along the Seine and turned the area into a small administrative center. They laid out streets, built public baths, and added the usual Roman features like temples and markets. Eventually, new districts grew on top of the old ones, and most of Lutetia disappeared under later construction. But some of it is easy to spot if you know where to look. The Arène de Lutèce, once a Roman amphitheater, survives between modern buildings, and parts of the ancient baths are preserved inside the Musée de Cluny. 16. Lisbon, Portugal. Modern Lisbon is built atop the ancient Roman settlement of Olisipo, which thrived from the 2nd century BCE. The Romans chose that spot for a reason. The Tagus River gave them a solid harbor, steady trade routes, and easy access to the rest of Lusitania. Olisipo came with all the usual Roman features, from baths and mosaics to forums, streets, and an aqueduct system that kept the city supplied with water. Most of it disappeared under later construction as Lisbon grew into a medieval port and later a capital, but pieces of the Roman town have survived. Excavations have uncovered sections of walls, workshops, and tiled floors hidden under newer buildings. Some shops in the Baisha district even have glass panels that let visitors look straight down at old stonework. 15. Xi'an, China. It doesn't take long in Xi'an to notice how many layers of history sit around the city. It's been important for more than 3,000 years and served as the capital for several Chinese dynasties. The old city walls still surround the city, and their size shows just how seriously past rulers protected it. But the area's most famous archaeological find is probably the 2,000-year-old terracotta army. Farmers discovered it in 1974 while digging a well, and it turned out to be part of a massive tomb complex of Qin Shi Huang. Thousands of clay soldiers stand in rows, each with different armor, faces, and hairstyles. Archaeologists continue to study the site, and are continuously discovering smaller pits and workshops that supported the main tomb. 14. Wellington, New Zealand. Wellington's hills and bays have seen a lot of change, but the first layout of the region came from Te Atiawa. They placed their fortified settlements on high ridges, kept gardens in the flatter spots, and worked the coast for fishing and trading. Once you know that, the small clues around the city make more sense. Some slopes have old terraces cut into them. and archaeologists occasionally find earth banks or middens when surveys are done for new projects. Each one is a small reminder of how busy this place has always been. When Europeans arrived in the 1800s, they started putting houses and streets across the same land, and the city grew over those earlier footprints. But ongoing research, along with Teotihuacan's own oral histories, continues to reveal how these earlier communities organized and cared for the land that now forms the capital. 13. Athens, Greece. If you've ever had the privilege to travel to Greece, you'll know that Athens doesn't hide its age. You walk through the city and the past shows up without any effort on your part. The Acropolis rises over the rooftops, and the Parthenon just about sets the tone long before you're close enough to see the details. The city has been around for thousands of years, and a lot of the early landmarks are part of the scenery to this day. The old theaters and open plazas sit beside cafes and shops, and the mix feels completely normal once you settle into it. Farther out, the remains of the temple of Olympian Zeus stand in an open field, and the Erechthion's carved figures still look toward the city. They sit in an open view, surrounded by regular activity, which makes the older and newer parts of Athens feel connected instead of separate. 12. Mexico City, Mexico. When the Spanish walked into Tenochtitlan in 1519, they wrote that the city was so large and organized, it felt closer to a European capital than anything they expected to find in the Americas. Hernán Cortés compared the markets to those in Seville, and the causeways and canals shocked the men who had never seen anything like it. 2 years later, after the siege in 1521, most of the city was in ruins. But instead of clearing everything, the Spanish used the surviving foundations as a guide. They built their churches, government buildings, and homes directly on top of Aztec platforms and walls because it was faster than starting from zero. Today, the Templo Mayor is the only part we can see. The rest of the old capital sits below the streets the Spanish laid out after the conquest. 11. Tunis, Tunisia. Carthage was founded by Phoenician traders in the 9th century BCE, and for centuries it controlled huge stretches of Mediterranean trade. Rome didn't appreciate the competition, which led to the Punic Wars and the city's destruction in 146 BCE. Even with that violent ending, plenty of Carthage survived under later construction. One of the stranger discoveries came from a place called the Tophet, a sanctuary and cemetery. There, they found ancient offerings such as gold coins and cremated remains from more than 2,300 years ago. Some coins were dedicated to deities like Tanit, the goddess of life and fertility, which shows a different side of Carthage. They weren't only running trade routes or fighting Rome, they also set aside valuable goods for religious use, following traditions that researchers are slowly piecing together today. 10. Harar, Ethiopia. Harar played a critical role in Ethiopia's history. Trade routes running toward the Red Sea funneled people, goods, and ideas into the city, which is why you see Arab, Indian, and African influences all sitting together inside the walls. Those walls were built in the 1500s by the legendary leader Emir Nur, and they turned Harar into a defendable hub that controlled movement in and out of the region. Inside the enclosure, the city feels nothing like the rest of Ethiopia. The lanes are tight, the houses sit close together, and the layouts follow Harari customs that go back hundreds of years. Living rooms have raised seating areas, storage niches, and baskets designed that each carry their own meaning. You also can see how strong religious life is. Roughly 90 mosques sit within the walls, mainly only a short walk apart. Living rooms have raised seating areas, storage niches, and basket designs that each carry their own meaning. You also see how strong religious life is. Roughly 90 mosques sit within the walls, many only a short walk apart. Other rulers left signs of their time here as well, from Egyptian-built buildings to Italian market halls, but the place never lost the style that makes it Harar. 9. Alexandria, Egypt. Egypt is basically synonymous with old ruins, but Alexandria is something special. The city was built right on the water's edge, so it was exposed to everything. Floods, earthquakes, shifting coastlines, all of it. Over time, whole sections of the old royal quarter slipped into the Mediterranean, which is why so many of its best relics are sitting underwater instead of on display. Divers have pulled up statues, columns, and pieces of palaces, and this is still one of the places people mention when talking about where Cleopatra's tomb might be. In the city itself, archaeologists have come across ancient streets, workshops, and burial areas while doing routine construction. Some digs even found parts of the old harbor walls sitting below modern foundations. so it truly stands out in a country already full of historic landmarks. 8. Palmyra, Syria. Palmyra sat in an oasis right in the middle of the desert, so every caravan moving between the Mediterranean and Persia passed through it. That traffic made Palmyra rich enough to build temples, markets, and a colonnaded street that stretched for 1.6 kilometers. Most of what's left of the ancient ruins comes from the 1st and 2nd centuries, when the palace hit its peak under Roman rule. But you can certainly feel the mix of influences that defined it. You've got Greek columns sitting beside local designs, Persian touches show up in the sculpture, and the tomb towers outside the walls look like nothing else from the period. In 2015, when ISIS moved into Palmyra, the ruins were among their first targets, and both the Temple of Bel and the Temple of Baal Shemin were destroyed. After ISIS was pushed out in 2017, UNESCO teams, Syrian archaeologists, and international specialists assessed what could be saved. And thankfully, some of the fallen pieces are intact enough to guide long-term restoration projects. 7. Jericho, West Bank. Jericho gets called the oldest city in the world so often that people forget the place is still inhabited. Most visitors drive past Tel Es Sultan without realizing that the little mound beside the road holds more than 20 layers of settlements stacked on top of each other. The oldest ones go back to around 9000 BCE, when the community here built a stone tower and a wall. That alone tells you how unusual this spot was. Something that doesn't get mentioned as much is how much of Jericho's history comes from the spring next to the Tel. Ain es Sultan kept the area watered here even in bad years, and that constant supply is why people rebuilt here again and again through the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and the Canaanite period. Excavations have pulled up everything from early skull burials to the remains of massive ramparts, and none of it fits the simple desert town image that people usually expect. 6. Tripoli, Libya. Tripoli started as Oea, a Phoenician outpost that later folded into the Roman world, and bits of that earlier city sometimes surfaced during roadwork or building repairs. Contractors have hit sections of Roman pavement, reused columns, and even fragments of old port structures buried under later foundations. Most of the best Roman ruins sit outside Tripoli at Leptis Magna and Sabratha, which is honestly simply incredible. The city used to be the hometown of the Emperor Septimus Severus, and he threw enough money at it to turn the coastal trading port into something that could compete with Rome itself. The streets were lined with markets, workshops, and bathhouses, and the harbor had an engineered basin big enough to handle ships from all over North Africa. 5. Kyoto, Japan. Kyoto was Japan's imperial center for more than 1,000 years, and it still feels like the gateway to the country's oldest traditions today. While modern Kyoto is full of lively neighborhoods and the energy of a big city, its historic areas have kept their unique character. And since the city wasn't bombed during the Second World War, much of its traditional architecture remains standing, attracting thousands of visitors each year. Kyoto's early history can also be seen at places like the Oeyama Historic Tomb and the Uenoyama Tumulus, ancient burial sites that show how long people have lived in the area. And let's not forget the Kiyomizu Dera and the Fushimi Inari, which are known worldwide for the Red Torii Gates. Both of these sites give a glimpse into Japan's spiritual history and show how modern life in Kyoto exists alongside traditions that go back hundreds of years. 4. Sana'a, Yemen. Sana'a grew out of an older Himyarite city that once sat on the crossroads of the incense trade, the same routes that carried goods and ideas between Arabia, Africa, and the Mediterranean. Frankincense and myrrh were in such high demand that Rome spent a fortune on them every year, so any city on those routes felt the benefits. That traffic also influenced the city far more than any single ruler ever could. Himyarite structures blended into Sabaean layers. Early Islamic buildings rose over both, and later generations kept adding to the same foundations. The old city's tall houses, mosques, and twisting lanes still follow those early outlines, which is why it feels so different from most capitals. 3. Sidon, Lebanon. The Phoenicians were there first, running a busy port that fed half the Mediterranean with goods and craftsmen. Then, the Crusaders arrived and built their sea castles on a little island just off the harbor, using the older Roman columns as reinforcement because they didn't want to quarry new stone. The causeway that links the castle to the mainland came later, added by Arab builders. And if the water is really clear, you can still see bits of the old ruins lying on the seabed. The Mamluks smashed the fortress in 1291, and it was rebuilt again in the 17th century, so the place is really a stack of different eras sitting in one spot. 2. Zaragoza, Spain. Caesar Augusta, now known as Zaragoza, was laid out in 14 BC. Caesar Augusta, now known as Zaragoza, was laid out in 14 BCE, right where the river Ebro bends, and it was far from a forgotten corner of the empire. It had aqueducts, baths, theaters, and even a sewer system so advanced that when workers uncovered it in the Plaza de la Seo in the late 80s, archaeologists couldn't believe how well preserved it was. Today, those old drains are on display in the Museum of the Forum, and seeing how the Romans moved water and waste around makes you appreciate how seriously they took city living. Augustus named the place after himself, which was unusual, and over time it became an administrative and commercial hub. Later rulers rebuilt parts of it, but that old sewer, preserved under layers of later construction, continues to be one of the best examples of how carefully the first architects designed the place. 1. Canterbury, England. The story of Canterbury really starts with a queen who wanted the chapel she could actually use. Bertha of Kent worshipped at St. Martin's in the late 500s, long before most English kingdoms had any sort of established church. When Augustine came from Rome in 597, he began preaching there too, and the site stayed active while the city expanded around it. Once the mission took hold, the next step was bigger. St. Augustine's Abbey, which grew from a simple burial place for Kent's kings into a major monastery. The ruins don't look like much from a distance, but walk through with a VR headset and you see the full scale of the medieval complex. The cathedral rounded out the trio, and today, it's that combination of 3 early Christian sites that continues to define Canterbury more clearly than anything that got built after them. And that's a wrap. If this list brought out your inner history geek, hit like and subscribe with that notification bell so you don't miss whatever we're dropping next. If you want to keep going, I've also lined up a related video here for you. 25 Ancient Ruins with Hidden and Unusual Secrets has everything from hidden chambers inside crumbling walls to unusual artifacts that still defy explanation. You should see the link to that one showing up right about here, after I've already been pointing to nothing, I guess. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time, but real quick, let me know, have you been to any of these cities? Have you seen any of the ancient cities that are these are on top of? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you later.